What is it that makes you a citizen of your country? Is it your birth certificate, your passport? Well, for tens of thousands of people in Uruguay, the answer is way more complicated than it should be. We're about to dive into this really strange paradox where a passport, the one thing that's supposed to prove your identity, can actually deny it.
I mean, just think about that for a second. What if the passport you carry, the very document that's meant to represent you to the world, suddenly said you weren't actually a national of the country you call home? It sounds like a bizarre hypothetical, right? But for so many in Uruguay, this is their everyday reality.
Okay, so here's exactly what happened. Before 1994, it was pretty straightforward. If you were a legal citizen of Uruguay but were born somewhere else, your passport said your nationality was Uruguayan legal citizen. Simple. It makes total sense. But then, after 1994, everything changed. All of a sudden, passports for the exact same people now listed their nationality as their country of birth. Just like that, Uruguay started officially telling its own citizens that they weren't Uruguayan nationals.
And look, this wasn't just some minor paperwork update. This single word swap on a piece of paper created this massive cascade of real-world problems. It's affected people's lives, the economy, and, frankly, the entire nation's reputation.
So what did this actually look like for people? Well, suddenly you have legal Uruguayan citizens being denied entry onto flights. Their visa applications getting rejected. They're facing suspicion and distrust at airports because their own passport creates this confusing, contradictory identity. And this doesn't just hurt individuals, it damages the credibility of the Uruguayan passport for everyone. It just screams institutional chaos, which, as you can imagine, is not exactly a great look for attracting investors or talented people from abroad.
This quote just puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? It really highlights how weird the situation is. This isn't normal at all. It makes Uruguay a total outlier on the global stage. I mean, the policy puts the country in this absurd position that contradicts both international law and just plain common sense.
And the damage isn't just external. Inside the country, it's created this sort of second-class citizen. These are people who pay taxes, they vote, they contribute to society, but they're being denied their full national identity. So you have to ask yourself, why would any young professional or a family want to move to a country that might not fully recognize them? It directly discourages the exact kind of immigration that Uruguay really needs.
And here's the truly wild part. This passport policy is actively working against the country's own best interests. Uruguay is dealing with an aging population, a social security system under a lot of strain. It needs population growth. It needs skilled immigrants to keep the whole system stable. And yet this policy is actively pushing those very people away. It's a completely self-inflicted wound.
And this is where you find the deepest paradox of all. Uruguay's entire history is a story of being built by immigrants. Its whole identity was forged by welcoming outsiders. So to now have a policy that, symbolically and legally, rejects the very people who choose to make Uruguay their home, it's just a profound betrayal of its own history. So you have to be wondering, how did such a counterproductive, self-sabotaging policy even happen? You'd probably assume it was some big law passed by the legislature after months of debate. But the truth is actually much more surprising and honestly a lot more troubling.
Now, this is so important to understand. This whole mess wasn't caused by a law. Not at all. It was an administrative decision, just a choice made by bureaucrats in the Ministry of the Interior back in 1994. There was no public debate, no vote in the legislature. It was just an internal choice that flew in the face of the Constitution and 100 years of practice. And this decision wasn't some minor tweak either. It was a radical break, a sharp U-turn away from a long, proud tradition of inclusion that had literally defined the country for over a century.
This timeline really tells the whole story. Just look at that long, stable stretch from 1919 all the way to 1994. The policy was consistent, it was inclusive. If you were a citizen, you were a national. Simple. Then boom, that sharp turn in 1994. And ever since, you see this growing list of negative consequences. It just shows you how sudden and jarring this change really was. To really get to the heart of the issue, you have to look at Uruguay's founding principles. See, it was established on a civic ideal, not an ethnic one. Being Uruguayan was always about a choice, the will to belong to the nation, not about where you happened to be born or who your parents were. This current policy just completely tramples on that core idea.
And hey, this isn't just a philosophical problem, it's a legal one. Big time. This administrative practice directly contradicts Uruguay's own constitution, which guarantees equality for everyone before the law.
It also violates their civil code and international agreements they've signed, like the American Convention on Human Rights. Legally speaking, it's completely indefensible.
So, okay, the problem is clear, the origins are clear, and the consequences are pretty severe. But here's the good news. The solution is remarkably straightforward.
Fixing this doesn't require reinventing the wheel or coming up with some brand new radical idea. The solution is simply to go back to what worked perfectly for over 75 years. It's about restoring coherence with the Constitution and just aligning this administrative practice with the law and the country's historical values.
And the benefits of making this change? They're enormous. It would immediately fix the legal and historical continuity. It would rebuild international trust in the Uruguayan passport. It would encourage the social integration the country needs, fulfill its human rights obligations, and maybe most importantly, it would allow Uruguay to recover its true identity as a democratic, equal, and open nation.
It really all boils down to this fundamental question, doesn't it? Is a nation's identity defined by its laws and its long-held values of inclusion, or is it defined by a single, contradictory line of text in a passport? For Uruguay, the answer to that question is going to shape its entire future.